I still remember the last family gathering I showed up to. 4th of July, backyard barbecue. My brother James stood there flipping burgers like he was king of the world, surrounded by our cousins, his Navy buddies, and my old man, who I swear hadn't looked me in the eye in 10 years. My mom fussed over everyone like she always did, acting like James had parted the Red Sea by making lieutenant. Nobody asked me what I'd been up to. Nobody even noticed I was there except to hand me a plate or tell me to take out the trash. That's how it always was. See, in their eyes, I was the other son. The one who never quite got it right. The kid who joined the army after barely scraping by in high school while James went off to Annapolis. I was the black sheep, the failure, the disappointment. And you know what? For a while, I almost believed them. Growing up, James was the golden boy. Straight A's, varsity everything, Eagle Scout, National Honor Society. I once saw my dad cry when James got his acceptance letter from the Naval Academy. Me? He barely said a word when I enlisted. I still remember the ride to the recruiter's office. Dad kept drumming the steering wheel like he couldn't believe it was happening. He didn't say much, just this one sentence before I got out of the truck. "You'll be back in 6 months. Broken bitter." Ugh. Well, I wasn't. I shipped off to Fort Benning in the middle of a Georgia summer. 102 degrees in the shade, sand fleas the size of marbles. I passed out on day 2, puked on day 3, and nearly quit on day 4. But something in me just held on. Maybe it was spite. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe I just didn't want to come back home with my tail tucked between my legs. Either way, I stayed, and over the years I climbed. Not fast, not flashy, but steady, reliable. I wasn't the best, but I never gave up. That counted for something. It wasn't long before I was running logistics in Afghanistan, organizing troop movements, keeping fuel lines moving, managing nightmare supply chains where a single lost crate of ammo could mean someone didn't make it home. That kind of stress changes you, makes you quiet, focused. Not that anyone back home cared. James was the star. His Navy career was a PR campaign with medals. Every time he got a promotion, it was a family event. When he made commander, Mom had custom cupcakes made with little anchors on top. I kid you not. When I made captain in the Army, I texted the family. Got 3 responses. One was my aunt asking if I could help her grandson get a VA loan. It didn't matter what I did. To them, James was the one who'd made it. He had the wife, the house in Arlington, the polished career, and that picture-perfect salute. Me? I was the guy they barely introduced at weddings. The one they thought was just running motor pools in the desert trying to stay relevant. They had no idea. What they didn't know was that in 2011, my team intercepted a weapons shipment outside Kandahar that saved over 120 lives. Or that I'd coordinated the air evac for a platoon pinned down in Helmand province. Or that I'd been awarded the Bronze Star, twice. But I didn't tell them, not because I was ashamed, but because I knew they wouldn't listen. It's funny how silence becomes your armor. You stop correcting people, you stop defending yourself, you just keep moving. Because in the military, respect isn't about who claps the loudest at Thanksgiving. It's about the man next to you trusting you with his life. And for 25 years, I earned that trust. Quietly. Then came the retirement ceremony. I didn't want one, honestly, thought I'd just sign the papers, collect the shadow box, and disappear into civilian life. But my CO insisted. "Colonel McKay," he said, "you gave us a quarter century. The least we can do is give you an hour." So I agreed. Told my family almost as an afterthought. Didn't expect them to come, didn't expect much of anything, but James showed up. That surprised me. He walked into the ceremony in full dress blues, 4 rows of ribbons on his chest. Still had that same straight back posture like he was born at attention. But he looked different, older, a little weathered, maybe humbled. Then I saw who came with him. General Stoddard, his boss, his commanding officer. I didn't know what James had told him about me. Probably not much. But what happened next changed everything. After the ceremony, after the speeches and the salute and the folded flag, General Stoddard walked over to me, looked me dead in the eye, held out his hand. "You're the Colonel McKay who saved Alpha Company in Helmand?" I nodded. He smiled. "Not the fake kind, the real kind. The kind a man gives another when he understands what it cost him. Your name's been passed around our briefings for years. It's an honor to finally shake your hand." And just like that, everything shifted. My brother turned pale. My mother's jaw dropped. And for the first time in 30 years, my father said something I never thought I'd hear. "Son, I didn't know." I just looked at him and said, "I know you didn't. So, you ever have one of those nights that stays with you forever? Not just because of what happened, but because of what it almost was." For me, that night was in Helmand Province. June 2011, a little outpost called Camp Harper, tucked into a valley no one cared about except the guys trying to kill us. We were stretched thin. Supply lines were a mess. Insurgents kept hitting our convoys, and the heat. Good Lord. The heat felt like God left the oven on. It melted everything, even your spirit, if you weren't careful. I was running logistics for Task Force Copperhead. Not glamorous, not heroic, just boxes, routes, manifests. But in war, logistics is the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. And that week, Alpha Company was on a forward op, isolated near Lashkar Gah, running low on everything: food, water, ammo, morale. We were supposed to resupply them by ground, but Taliban pressure made the roads suicide runs. The brass called off the convoy. But I couldn't let those men hang out there with nothing. I had friends in Alpha, guys I trained with, guys I knew by name. So I made a call, not to higher command, to a friend of mine in Army Aviation, CW4 Danny Keller, Black Hawk pilot, hard-headed Texan, always looking for trouble. "Hey Danny," I said, "I need a ride." He laughed. "Don't tell me you finally got a date." "Nope. But I do have 800 pounds of MREs and 3,000 rounds of 5.56 looking for a loving home." There was a long pause. "You know that's a no-go, right?" "I know," I said, "but what if we don't ask?" We launched that night. No orders, no comms chatter, just 3 birds in blackout mode flying nap of the earth over Taliban territory. I rode in the second bird, gear strapped to the floor, eyes on the desert. There's a silence in combat flights that's hard to describe. It's not peace. It's not fear. It's just aware. Every second your body knows one bullet, one RPG, one engine failure means lights out. We hit Alpha's coordinates just past Oro 200. I remember the flare they popped, a signal we were clear to land. Bright red hanging in the sky like a heartbeat. We touched down, unloaded in under 90 seconds, and lifted before the sound could even settle in the dust. No one died that night. No one even got scratched. But that wasn't the impressive part. The impressive part came after. When we got back, I wrote the report. Full disclosure, I wasn't gonna let Danny take the fall if Brass found out. I put my name on every line. 2 days later, I got called in. Thought I was done. Instead, I found Colonel Grissom, the brigade commander, sitting behind his desk with a file in front of him and a coffee cup that said, "Don't ask me, I just work here." He didn't yell, didn't even look mad. He just said, "Why'd you do it?" I told him the truth. Because they were out there alone, and I wasn't gonna let them die over red tape. He stared at me for a long time, then signed something in the file. "Dismissed, Colonel. Oh, and close the door behind you." That was it. No medal, no reprimand, no memo, just quiet approval. I found out later he forwarded the report up the chain. Word spread, quietly. through those channels that only military folks understand, where your name gets mentioned in a meeting you'll never attend by people you'll never meet. I didn't think much of it. I went back to work, kept grinding, kept solving problems in the shadows, but apparently somebody remembered my name. Years later, when my brother James made senior officer and started rubbing shoulders with generals, that report came up again. Turns out General Stoddard, the same guy who shook my hand at my retirement, had seen my name twice in high-level briefings. Once for that unauthorized resupply, and once more in 2014 for an incident I still can't talk about. What I can say is this: we were running a joint op with SOCOM in northern Iraq. Intel was scattered, command was fractured, and somehow a classified asset went missing. It wasn't my job to find it, but I did. Because that's what logistics guys do, we find what's missing. I pulled 3 strings, rerouted 2 convoys, convinced a Kurdish colonel to let me borrow a fuel truck, and sent my team through a goat trail no American vehicle had ever touched. We got the package back. I signed an NDA the next day, and for years nobody said a word, but people noticed, even if my family didn't. My brother once told me, "You never went anywhere." That's how they saw it. I was never stationed in D.C., never gave speeches, never got featured in the Armed Forces Network newsletter. But while James was giving briefings on the Hill, I was quietly holding broken systems together with duct tape and blood. Not everything that matters gets applause. Some things just work, and people stay alive because they do. I think back to those years sometimes. Not in glory, not in regret, just memory. I think of the soldiers I worked with, the ones who never got medals but deserved them, the ones who manned checkpoints at 3 a.m. or fixed radios in 120-degree heat, the ones who cried quietly in the dark, then went out on patrol anyway. You want to know real courage? It's not in the movies. It's in the 19-year-old kid with a busted knee who still shows up to pack ammo crates because his squad depends on him. I saw that courage every day. And I learned to live by one rule. If they don't remember my name, let them remember that somebody cared. You know, everyone's got that one moment where the weight gets too heavy. The kind where you sit on the edge of your bunk, boots still on, and think, is it even worth it anymore? For me, that moment came in 2015. Back then, I was stationed at Fort Hood, stateside at last. I'd just rotated back from Iraq and was expecting some well-earned downtime, a chance to breathe, maybe even think about settling down, if you can believe that. But peace never lasted long in my line of work. It started with a routine check on our supply contracts. Nothing exciting, just part of the job. I was digging through fuel reports, manifests, invoices, when I saw something that didn't make sense. A contractor out of El Paso was billing us for diesel at almost double the standard rate. They'd been doing it for months and nobody caught it. I cross-checked it, thinking maybe it was a clerical issue. It wasn't. They were bleeding Uncle Sam dry, and worse, they were delivering short. Some of the fuel orders were marked fulfilled, but I had convoy logs that said otherwise. That meant soldiers downrange, our soldiers, weren't getting the fuel they needed. And let me tell you something. In a combat zone, no fuel means no movement. No movement means sitting ducks. That's not just fraud. That's life or death. I brought it up to my immediate supervisor. He gave me that look. The kind of look guys give when they realize you just handed them a hornet's nest. "Colonel," he said, "are you sure you want to dig into this?" "Sir," I said, "I don't think I have a choice." He sighed. "Then be careful." That should have been my first red flag. But I didn't back off. I started tracking every invoice from that contractor. I pulled records, talked to guys on the ground, compared GPS logs from the convoys. Piece by piece, I built a picture. And what I found made me sick. They weren't just overcharging. They were bribing junior personnel to sign off on bogus deliveries. A few soldiers were in on it, civilians too. A little cash here, a little favor there, and before long it turned into a multi-million-dollar operation, all under our noses. I put together a report. 27 pages, fully documented, tied everything to names, times, and locations. I handed it off to CID, Army Criminal Investigation Division, and figured that's that. But it wasn't. 3 days later, I came into my office and found my security clearance temporarily revoked. My access to systems was blocked. I was under review for violating chain of command protocol. Someone upstairs didn't like what I'd uncovered. That's when I realized this rabbit hole went way deeper. Now I've taken plenty of hits in my life. Had my name dragged, been ignored, disrespected, overlooked. But this felt personal. Like they were telling me, sit down, shut up, know your place. I went home that night, closed the door, and stared at my uniform. Thought about all the birthdays I missed, all the funerals I couldn't attend, the buddies I buried, the woman I almost married who got tired of waiting. And now, after all that, I was being treated like the enemy. I poured a glass of bourbon and sat on the porch until the sun came up, and I seriously considered turning in my papers. But something stopped me. It wasn't pride. It wasn't stubbornness. It was a memory. A convoy in Afghanistan. Year before. We were escorting supplies through a narrow pass, dust everywhere, visibility near zero. I was in the second Humvee. A young sergeant, Hernandez, was up front, just a kid, 21, bright-eyed, loved baseball. His truck hit an IED. We lost him instantly. And in the aftermath, when we were all standing there in that choking silence, I remember thinking, if I ever get the chance to save someone else's son from ending up like that, I'm taking it. That was the promise I made to myself. And I wasn't about to break it, so I stayed in. I fought the review, filed appeals, brought in JAG, and slowly the truth started to crack through the surface. A new CID officer picked up my case. Young guy, fresh out of Quantico. Sharp as a tack and still believed in the rules. He reopened the investigation, and this time, people paid attention. 2 contractors were arrested. A staff sergeant was dishonorably discharged. A regional commander was reassigned, which is military speak for kicked out the back door. I was cleared of all wrongdoing, but there was no apology, no ceremony, no thank you. Just a quiet reinstatement and a memo that read, "Matter resolved, resume duties." You know what? I was okay with that. Because I wasn't doing it for a headline. I did it because men like Hernandez deserve better. Because somewhere out there a soldier got the fuel he needed to make it back. Because that's the job, even when the system tries to break you. After that, I kept my head down. Didn't make waves. But the people who needed to know. They knew. My CO pulled me aside one day and said, "You did the right thing, McKay, and we noticed." Funny thing is, James never even heard about it, not until years later. When I finally told him, he blinked like I was making it up. "You could have gone to jail," he said. "Yeah," I shrugged, but I didn't. And that was the end of that conversation, because deep down, I think it rattled him. Knowing that his screw-up brother had gone toe-to-toe with the machine and come out the other side clean. Retirement didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a wake with cake. People smiled, shook my hand, said the usual things. "Thank you for your service. You must be proud. What will you do next?" But most of them had no idea what those 25 years had taken from me. There's this strange silence when you hang up your uniform for the last time. Like the world suddenly stops calling your name. After my ceremony, when General Stoddard shook my hand, when my brother's jaw nearly hit the floor, when Dad finally looked at me like a man instead of a disappointment, I expected something to shift. I thought maybe we'd talk, but we didn't. James left first. He had some DC gala or Navy dinner to catch. He gave me a pat on the shoulder and said, "Hell of a send-off, bro." Mom was next. She hugged me, smiled that soft little smile she always had, and whispered, "You always were stronger than you looked." But Dad, he hung back. We were alone in the parking lot when he finally walked over. He was smaller than I remembered, not physically, but something in his posture. He didn't carry himself like the lion he used to be. He looked tired, hollow. He cleared his throat. "You did good," he said. I just nodded. He tried again. "I didn't know everything." I shrugged. "You never asked." That stung him. I could tell. But it was true. Growing up, my father was a tough man. Factory worker, Korean War vet. The kind who thought emotions were weakness and compliments were earned once, maybe twice in a lifetime. He didn't raise me to cry. He raised me to endure. And I did. But it came at a cost. There were years, whole decades, where I thought the only way to win his approval was to become something I wasn't. Sharper, smoother, more like James. But I was never that guy. I was the quiet one, the grinder, the one who learned early that some things don't get fixed, they just get carried better. And for most of my life, I carried the weight of not being him. Until that parking lot. When he reached out his hand, not as a father, but as a man, we shook. It was a strange moment. No grand reconciliation, no teary hug, just a quiet gesture between two tired soldiers, one old, one older. And that was enough. For the first time, I think he saw me. Not the screw-up, not the second son, not the afterthought, just me. Colonel Robert McKay, retired. I wish I could say everything got better after that. That the family pulled together, that James and I finally got along, that the scars disappeared. But life doesn't work like that. Coming home is hard, harder than anyone tells you. You go from life and death decisions to arguing with a plumber about an estimate. You go from commanding battalions to being told to hit pound to speak with a representative. It's humbling, it's frustrating, and sometimes it breaks guys. You ever hear the statistic? According to the VA, nearly 20 veterans a day take their own lives. That's not a number, that's a crisis. And the worst part? Most of them never say a word. I got lucky. One day, about 6 months after I retired, I walked into a VFW hall near my place in Killeen. Just wanted a beer and a quiet spot. Inside was a table full of old-timers playing dominoes, talking trash, passing around war stories like they were poker chips. I grabbed a drink, sat at the bar, and kept to myself. Then one of them turned around, a Marine named Donnie with a silver beard and a voice like gravel, and said, "You Army?" "Yeah," I nodded. "Good," he said. "We need someone to take this guy's seat. He cheats." That's how it started. Over the next few weeks, I kept coming back. Not because I needed friends, but because I didn't know I was allowed to have them again. Those men, they didn't care about rank. They didn't care about medals. They cared that you showed up, that you listened, that you didn't BS your way through conversation. And slowly I started to open up, started telling stories I hadn't even told myself out loud. About the night I froze on a patrol because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. About the friend I lost to friendly fire. About the time I woke up in the middle of the night screaming and didn't even remember the dream. And nobody flinched. They just nodded. Because they'd been there. Sometimes healing doesn't come from therapy or meds or meditation. Sometimes it comes from a beat-up bar stool and a guy who says, "Yeah, I felt that too." That VFW hall saved me more than once. Not because it fixed me, but because it reminded me I wasn't broken alone. A year later, I got invited to speak at a high school civics class. They were doing a unit on military service. I almost said no, but something in me knew maybe that was the next chapter, so I went. I stood there in front of 30 teenagers in hoodies and sneakers, none of whom had ever even seen a uniform in person, and I told them the truth. Not the recruitment poster version, the real version. I told them about the dust, the boredom, the fear, the loyalty, the responsibility, the pain, and I told them why I did it anyway. Not because I wanted to be a hero, but because someone had to carry the hard stuff, and I had 2 hands and a heartbeat. When I finished, the teacher pulled me aside. She said, "That was the most honest thing they've heard all semester." I walked out of there that day feeling something I hadn't felt in a while. Useful. About a year and a half into retirement, I got invited to a formal military gala in D.C., a joint service recognition event for senior officers, both active and retired. I almost didn't go. I'm not one for suits and handshakes and politicians pretending they know what an IED smells like. But an old buddy from logistics, Mike Templeton, Navy side, was getting an award, and he begged me to come. "Bob," he said, "there's free steak, good whiskey, and about 100 people who don't know what a real supply chain looks like. I need backup." So I dusted off my best blazer, polished the shoes, and hopped on a plane to Washington. The ballroom was everything you'd expect. White linen, flags in every direction, a sea of uniforms and ribbons. There was a table for each branch, and wouldn't you know it? I got seated right between 2 Air Force colonels and an Army captain who looked like he just stepped out of ROTC. I was halfway through my first glass of bourbon when I saw James. He was across the room surrounded by Navy brass, laughing that same big laugh he always had. Shiny medals, impeccable posture, still looked like a recruitment ad. We locked eyes briefly. He gave me a nod like we were strangers who vaguely recognized each other from an airport lounge. That was fine by me. After the dinner, they brought out the keynote speaker, General Stoddard. Yeah, that General Stoddard. James's boss. He'd retired 6 months earlier, but his name still carried weight across every branch. Tactical genius, no nonsense. Spoke like a preacher, but thought like a chess grandmaster. He took the podium and delivered a speech that started like most, thanking the troops, honoring the families, emphasizing unity across services. But then, about 10 minutes in, his tone changed. "We've got a lot of folks in this room who've worn the uniform proudly. But I want to take a second to recognize a type of service that doesn't always get the spotlight." He talked about logistics, about the people behind the curtain, the ones who made sure the boots had tread, the rifles had parts, and the birds had fuel. Then he said, "There's a retired Army colonel in this room who once rerouted a supply network in under 6 hours to prevent a full battalion from running dry on the Syrian border. He didn't ask permission. He just did the job and saved lives. His name is Colonel Robert McKay." You could have heard a pin drop. I froze. I hadn't told anyone, not even Mike. I hadn't expected that. Suddenly, all eyes were on me. The Air Force colonels turned in their seats. Someone at the head table started clapping. Then the room followed. I stood up, awkwardly, slowly, and nodded. That's all I could do. Words felt heavy in my mouth. From across the ballroom, I saw James. This time, he wasn't smiling. He looked stunned, not angry, not embarrassed, just like he didn't know who I was. And maybe he didn't. After the event, while folks were making their way to the bar or the valet line, James came up to me. He wasn't alone. General Stoddard was with him. "Colonel McKay," Stoddard said, extending his hand. "I've been quoting your methods to junior officers for years. It's a pleasure to finally shake your hand in front of a crowd." I shook it. "Sir, I had no idea you remembered," he smiled. "Men like you? We don't forget." Then he turned to James and said something I'll never forget. "You've got a hell of a brother, Commander. Hope you're half the officer he is." And just like that, he walked away. left James and me standing there in a silence we hadn't shared in years. For the first time, James looked human. Not the polished Navy officer, not the golden child. Just a man who suddenly realized the foundation of his beliefs was built on sand. "I didn't know, Bob," he said quietly. I nodded. "That's been the theme, hasn't it?" He let out a laugh, soft, genuine, tired. "I think I was always too busy proving I was the best," he said. "Never occurred to me you were out there doing all the things I bragged about wanting to do." I didn't say anything. Not because I was angry anymore, I just didn't need to rub it in. Some truths speak for themselves. We walked to the valet line together, talked about Mom, about how she still sent emails in all caps, about Dad who'd passed 6 months earlier. James said he found a box of letters Dad had kept, every one I'd ever sent from overseas. That caught me off guard. "I didn't know he kept them," I said. "Me neither," James said. "He never talked about it. But I think he read every single one." We stood there quietly for a moment. Then James said something I never expected to hear. "You ever think about writing a book?" I chuckled. "About what? Logistics and rejection?" "No," he said, serious now. "About leadership, about owning your role, about showing up when nobody's watching." "I'm no writer." "Well," he said, "maybe it's time you learned." I hadn't been to Dad's grave since the funeral. Couldn't bring myself to go. Not because I was angry, not anymore. It was something else, something harder to admit. I was afraid. Afraid I'd stand there and feel nothing. Afraid I'd feel too much. But a few months after the gala, after that moment with James, after General Stoddard's handshake, I finally drove out to that quiet patch of grass where the man who raised me was buried under a simple government-issued headstone. Raymond McKay, father, veteran, 1934-2023, no frills, just the facts. Same way he lived. I brought a folding chair and a cup of gas station coffee. Sat there for about an hour, just watching the wind pass through the trees. Didn't say much at first. What do you say to a man who never really said much to you? Then I remembered what James told me about the box, the letters, so I started talking. I told him what it was like in Iraq that first winter, how the sandstorms stung like glass, how the chow hall always ran out of Tabasco. I told him about Hernandez, the convoy, the sleepless nights, the bronze stars I never mentioned. I told him how hard it was to be his son sometimes, how I used to measure myself by the inches he never gave. And then I told him something I didn't even know I believed until the words came out. "I think you were proud of me. You just didn't know how to say it. You see, men like my father, and probably a lot of you listening right now, we were raised in a time when silence was strength, when vulnerability was for the weak, when love looked like gas in the tank and the lawn mowed just right. But that kind of silence, it doesn't last forever. Eventually it echoes, and it either drives a wedge between people, or it becomes the bridge." I sat there in that chair for 2 hours, cried once, quietly. Then I stood up, took a deep breath and said, "You were hard, but I learned from you, and I'm still here. So I guess we both did something right." I left a challenge coin on the headstone, one I earned in Helmand, the one I used to rub between my fingers when I didn't know if I'd make it home. Felt right to leave it with him, because despite everything, he was the reason I became who I am. Life after the Army wasn't easy, but I found my footing. I started volunteering at that same VFW hall, took over the logistics of their events, of course. Old habits die hard. Taught a few classes at a local community college about supply chain management. Even helped a few younger vets start their own businesses. One of them opened a tactical gear shop. Another one runs a security firm now. And every now and then they'll shoot me a text like, "Hey, Colonel, your spreadsheet saved my butt again." It's not a parade, but it's purpose. And for men like us, that's more than enough. James and I, we talk more now. Not every day, but the calls come without tension. He still lives in D.C., still drinks fancy coffee and wears cologne you can smell from a parking lot away. But he respects me now, not just for what I did, but for the fact that I did it without needing to be seen. Funny thing is, that's the part that impresses him the most. So if you're still with me, still watching this old soldier ramble through his memories, let me leave you with this. There are two kinds of respect in this world. The kind that's given when the cameras are on, and the kind that's earned when nobody's watching. I spent most of my life being invisible to the people who should have seen me first. And for a long time that hurt. But what I've learned, what I know now, is this. You don't need applause to matter. You don't need a headline to make an impact. And you sure as hell don't need anyone's permission to do the right thing. If you're a man in your 60s, 70s, maybe older. Maybe you're sitting in a quiet house with your thoughts. Maybe you're wondering if anyone remembers what you gave. Let me tell you right now. We remember. The ones who made it through the fire. The ones who carried the weight. The ones who kept the engine running even when nobody said thank you. You mattered. You still matter. And it's never too late to pick up the phone, go visit the old team, share your story, or just let someone in. Because silence is heavy. But truth sets you free. To every man out there who ever felt forgotten, dismissed, or overlooked, your story is not over. Whether you were on the front lines or behind the scenes, whether you wore boots or held the fort at home, you were part of something that mattered. And your value doesn't retire when you do. If this story hit home, do me a favor. Like this video so YouTube knows it's worth hearing. Comment with your story, where you served, what you learned, or the moment that defined you. Subscribe if you want more stories about men like us. Stories that don't make the front page but make all the difference. Because around here, we remember the ones who showed up,